on with us, please? So
Frank Pinter.
Randy Netherland.
All right. Kevin?
Kevin's here.
And Sharon?
I'm here.
And Lisa is here. Leo is here. And who? I have Scott and Ryan. Did I miss anybody? All right, we only have one order of business today, and that is to go over the possible refinancing options. And I'm going to turn it over to Scott to go over that for us.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everybody, for joining in this morning. I'm going to see if I can share my presentation here, which I think you may have in front of you as well. So bear with me for just a second here. Okay, do folks see, I guess, this presentation on their screen, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. And I may see if I can make this larger for folks as well. Okay. Again, thank you very much for having us here today. So what we're going to talk about is the county has, I guess, several outstanding bond issues that may be able to be refinanced for savings. And some of them are also, I guess, further associated with Belfair or with Rustlewood. So we'll show you some, I guess, basic refunding savings, and then we'll also show you, I guess, just some restructuring options, again, very basic options, just to give you a sense of, I guess, what you could do when you refinance the debt. You don't have to do it at all, but we just, again, wanted to present those options to you so you could see what the savings patterns look like if we do it in a different sort of way. So again, Scott Bauer, Northwest Municipal Advisors, and on the call with us here today is Ryan Newmeister. I did want to go just quickly into the bond market. The interest rates hit historical lows back in March, just ahead of the COVID-19 pandemic. But then in mid to late March, early April, then interest rates really became quite volatile, and essentially the bond market shut down. But since that period of time, actually, the bond market has come back, and interest rates are now again competing for historical lows. So the charts you see down below look at a 20-year type bond and just an index of those bonds and what they've done since 1990, and then same data, but just zoomed into the past 3 years. So again, interest rates, historically speaking, are exceptionally low. So turning specifically then to Mason County's debt, on the next two slides, we'll take a look at some of your outstanding bonds, and then also some loans that you have outstanding with Department of Ecology. So again, here are your outstanding bonds. I'll just make a couple of notes about some of them. For instance, the 2008 bonds were callable starting in June of 2018. And what the call date, when I mentioned that means that at any point starting on that date or thereafter, you can refinance the debt. So it's not a date where it has to happen. It's just the first opportunity that you have to do it. In late 2017, we actually had included this bond in with another, I think, Department of Ecology loan. That one we did ultimately refinance, but in December when we were looking to issue these bonds, the savings on this 2008 actually dipped below the county's policy of a 5% savings. So ultimately this bond was not refinanced at that time and still remains outstanding. You see then the two Rustlewood debts here, and then in 2011 you issued bonds for Belfair. Those bonds are technically not callable until June 1 of 2020, 2021, sorry. But we will talk about those throughout this presentation. You can do what's called an advance refunding. If you were done now, it would be done with more expensive type debt. So we're not necessarily recommending that to happen, but we do include it here just so you can kind of see the order of magnitude when we get to Belfair. Other debts here in white you see are either the call dates are a little farther out, so it doesn't make sense to do those, or there's simply not a call option on them. And then finally we have, I guess, your 2019 LTGO for the Olson building, which we've included again in the refunding savings, and we're assuming that that can be prepaid at any time. So turning to then some outstanding loans. So the top one, again, the 2002, the 0% interest rate, you can't beat that, not included when we look at this. But then you do have these other ones associated with Belfair, the 2007, 10, 13AB, and 14. So we will take a look at those momentarily. So we first took a look at refinancing these bond or all this debt listed here and previously to see what kind of savings we would get just by doing what I'd say is a basic refunding, where we're trying to lower the debt service or payments each and every year. And when I say debt service, I mean principal and interest payments, where we lower that each and every year to the extent we can. We don't look to extend any final maturities, so we keep each individual's final maturity where it's at. And that's kind of the first pass that we did to say, does it make sense at all to include these or not? When we get into the question of restructuring, then those may be done for other reasons. But again, as a first pass to see what achieved a savings threshold, that's how we did it. So when we look at your 2008 and your 2019, the savings were above your 5% threshold. And ultimately, whether you believe that the dollars make sense or not, would certainly be a valid question. But again, just as a first pass, we said, does it go above the 5% threshold? And so these two, in that case, do. We then took specifically look at the debt associated with Belfair. So you see those listed here. And again, I have the 2011 bonds listed here. Those are below your threshold. But we will, as we go into more specifics on Belfair, we will include it just so you can see that, again, the order of magnitude difference. But again, not necessarily recommending that you do that right now. And then again, when we look at Belfair, we will include also these three loans, your 10s, 13As, and 13Bs. Right now, either the term or the interest rates are just fairly low, and just not, even though we're above 5% here on the 2014s, dollar-wise, it just didn't seem to make any sense to include the 14s. And then finally, we'll take a look at Rustlewood here shortly. So as we said, when you go through and refinance, you can always decide at that time, do we lower debt service each and every year, or do we want to look to restructure that? So we'll talk about that in a moment. So now I've grouped on this slide the Belfair debt. So from the first two slides we saw, I pulled in the 2011 bonds and then the 5 series here of Department of Ecology loans, just so you can see what the current debt service is on the Belfair debt. So it's just shy, I think, of $1 million. Starts to trail off in 2030, and then finally all of these loans are currently scheduled to be paid off by 2033. So in this, we'll show you 3 scenarios for you to take a look at. In the first scenario, again, we're going to just see if we can lower debt service by an equal amount each and every year and not change the final maturity. In scenario 2, what we try to do is see if we can pull all of the savings that you get up front so that you would realize lower debt service payments in the first 1 to 2 to 3 years, and then debt service essentially would return to what you're paying now but again, not changing any of the final maturity dates on the loans. And then finally, in scenario 3, we say, let's just extend all the debt out to 2040. So that, again, would be an extension of all of these loans because they're all maturing by 2033. Again, just so you could see what the impact is from doing something like that. We didn't include the 2014s as mentioned, but for the purposes of showing you the magnitude of change, we have included the 2011 bonds. So as I mentioned, they're callable on June 1 of 2021. You can call them as early as March of 2021 with tax-exempt debt. So any point after that point, you could do that, which is lower cost of borrowing. If you were to do it now, which you could do, it would be with taxable debt, and that's more expensive debt. So as I mentioned earlier, we're not necessarily recommending you do that, but just wanted to show you the difference. So going into then the Belfair scenario where we apply equal savings, over here we're showing your current debt service structure, and here is the annual savings then by refinancing these 4 debts. So you see initially, and again, we assume just for purposes of running numbers that it would occur sometime in the fall. That doesn't mean it has to occur in the fall, but that's just why we show some savings here in 2020 and then savings out to 2032. And then the resulting debt service. And over here is just a graph of that. So blue is your current debt service line, and red would be the new one. So the gap being the savings. So scenario 2, as I mentioned, we try to pull all the savings up front. So in this case, 271,000 into 2020. Again, doesn't have to be there, could be scheduled into 2021. But 271 here, 102, 103,000 next year, and then essentially debt service returns back to what it currently is. So minimal savings beyond that. So again, you can see on the graph a depiction of that savings. Oops. So finally then, the Belfair scenario that then extends the debt out to 2040. So here's again the depiction of that, 160,000 of savings, about 400,000 savings or difference than what you're paying now until we get to 2030, 2029, 2030. But then of course your existing Belfair debt falls off, and in this case, if we're extending it, the new debt would continue on. So instead of having quote unquote savings, you're now of course paying more than you had previously. And while that results in a net present value, so if we could present value these cash flows back and say, okay, how much is that worth to me today? This is the figure here, 143,000. But if we just simply sum up these positives and negatives, it results in a little bit more than $1 million of additional debt service in this structure. Now, I think I'll maybe step through just Belfair real quick, and then I'd certainly be happy to come back and look at any or all of these slides or answer any questions. But Belfair will be a little bit similar in what we did here. Fair enough. So here's then the Rustlewood debt. So this again groups those two together. You can see how much is outstanding. Rustlewood already goes out fairly long. So when we look at the next two scenarios, we don't show the third one because the third one we showed going out to 2040. These are already out long. So in the case of Rustlewood, again, I just mentioned that So scenario 1, no change in those final maturities, try to lower debt service each and every year. Scenario 2, try to pull the savings all up front. So here again is really the change from lowering debt service each and every year. We do have a little bit of a scissor, and that's just how the resulting debt service, we could make that smoother, but essentially, anywhere maybe an average of $10,000 lower debt service each and every year from this example. In the front load, the savings example, then, and again, we can get rid of additional negative in this year, but this is what I want you to focus on, those $37,000 of savings for through 2025, and then debt service essentially returns back to its same amount. So again, that's the pull the savings as far forward as we possibly can. So I guess as mentioned, several of the county's bonds do show a net present value savings. When and if you decide to refinance them, you can do a number of things. You can reshape it, or you can keep it the same. You can reshape some and not all. So there's a lot of different things that you can do depending on the county's needs. And so if you do decide at a point to proceed with a refinancing, then we'd want to figure out which ones should we include and do we restructure any of the bonds. So Lisa, that I guess concludes my formal presentation, and happy to clarify or answer any questions.
All right. So my first question, Scott, is do you include the 2008? Oh, it's not in the 2008 is not in the Belfair.
I don't think it's the Belfair loan, but please correct me if I have that wrong.
No, that was right. I meant the 2011.
So I did include, when we were looking at these, I did include it. Now, as you can see here, it has 115,000 net present value savings, or 3.65% of the principal amount being refunded. So I wanted to show you the impact of that. Now, I did run this and say, okay, let's imagine we are now in March of next year, and that interest rates have not changed, and so that we can actually refinance this with tax-exempt bonds. The savings in that case then increases from what you see here, 115,000, up to up by about 200,000, so at about 317,000, which is about 10% of the bond issue of its original principal amount. It also changes the annual savings that you get from this one issue from about 10,000 a year in the advanced refunding case, again, what you see here, to about $32,000 $32,000 a year. So again, annual savings increase. So, but this, what you see here, does assume that you did include it, just for showing you the magnitude.
Scenario 1 for equal savings.
Yep.
When we took that out, our net savings would be less that 115,000. So
correct.
Okay.
Then probably your annual savings here would be lower by about $10,000.
Okay.
And again, you could come back at a later time and then pick this one up, the 2011.
Sure.
Or alternatively, I should say, you could wait on these and include it when you're ready to do your 2011. So.
So in your crystal ball, waiting to do a whole refinance in 2021, does that make any sense, or do you piecemealing it and doing part of it now and part of it then make better sense?
Right. Yeah, that's if I had the crystal ball. Not that I wouldn't want to be speaking to you all here today, but I might not be. So Yeah, I don't think that we're hearing necessarily that, anybody's expecting interest rates through the rest of this year is probably bond market volatility, just as, we get closer and closer to a presidential election and information comes out and maybe, the markets go one way or the other. But, I think there might be some expectation that we're perhaps in a low, it might not be as low as you see here, but a generally low interest rate environment for a bit.
Frank, do you want to weigh in, or Sharon, do you want to weigh in?
I agree with Scott in that obviously a crystal ball is difficult to forecast, but taking advantage of what the market has today and then making a decision to look at the 2011 next year may kind of catch us the benefit of both sides of the conversation. What I mean by that is take the advantage of where the interest rate is now and then hope that the interest rate stays where it is in March of next year and then refinance that piece. So they're just my thoughts.
I would agree with as well. So what are the...
Yeah, I was going to say, I wish we had a crystal ball that was perfectly clear. But no, I think it's a great idea. I think we should take advantage of getting a lower interest rate if possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the feeling then for just saving, making equal savings versus extending the final maturity? Interest in trying to front load this? I don't personally think so, but and I'm not sure that I'm not sure that, I don't know, I guess, what the commissioners are thinking in that they would want to extend it. I don't see the savings anywhere worth redoing this to extend it out to 2040.
Lisa, this is
Kevin, can I jump in for a second?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we absolutely should pursue this, and I think the equal savings scenario is the one that makes the most sense. Whether we leave the 2011 off or not, I think we need to move forward with it. The question I do have for Scott is, when we went through this in 2017, we obviously went through a credit rating downgrade. Where do you see that part of the process and how we might fare going through that again this time? I'm not sure how much you've had a chance to look at our current financials and to make a statement on it, but just kind of maybe an off the cuff thought from you on where we are credit wise.
Right. Yeah. And so you're right. I haven't looked at you in detail here. So if we were to do this as a public bond sale, again, similar to what we did in 2017, you would head back out to obtain a rating on the new bonds. Another option is potentially a bank financing. Now, what we've seen most recently is generally a public bond sale has been generating a little more savings than a bank financing. But there are some banks, if they participate, come fairly close to a public bond sale. Now, I guess the slight complicating factor in deciding if you wanted to do a bank financing is, I guess, not only maybe the differential in savings, but the Rustlewood debt, I guess in particular, goes out to 2030, which is fairly long for banks to participate in. You get a lot of interest. You tend to get a lot of interest in the first 10 years, and then banks start to fall off once you get from 10 to 20. getting out to 2030 would be a challenge. So I guess all that's to say is if Rustlewood were included, this probably would be more of a bond issue, and you would need to go out and get a credit rating. I think your credit rating when you last went out, as you mentioned, I think downgraded to an A+. And so again, we'd have to go out and S&P would need to take a look at this particular bond issue for you and get a rating on it.
So I think so this is Lisa, and I think, you know, we've made significant strides in getting our cash reserves and so forth into place and up to par, and I would welcome actually a new bond rating from S&P. My only concern is in this current pandemic environment, how that may affect it, because there's so many unknowns moving forward, revenue-wise, that we don't have a lot of answers to. So there could be a question with that, and then how that would play into it. So
Yeah, I totally
there's
agree.
always
I
a
think
risk there, but
I certainly think we're in a lot better position than we were a couple of years ago. But I mean, he raises a good point. Scott, do you have any insight on that side of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess when we would get to a rating process, I mean, I guess there are other folks, other issuers who are in the same boat as you, because there are so many unknowns. We don't know what the duration of this will be. We don't know what the magnitude necessarily will be. So, you know, when going through the process, they certainly will be taking a look at, you know, historicals. And then to the extent that we can say, you know, this is what the county is forecasting, and this is, you know, the proactive measures that the county is doing, you know, on the expense side or whatever, we would present that to them. But I guess you're not unique in this sense. There's others, again, that are going through this process and having to present this type of information. So I think they realize that you don't have all the answers.
Randy, do you have any insight or anything you'd like to include or say, or?
Yeah, I'm thinking this thing through. You know, I appreciate all the particular.
It's hard for me to see on the screen, but I am working on that. I would be curious to see what the banks are saying right now, but if we could get them to look at our credit rating, I think it's time for. We're sitting cash-wise better than we've ever have in history. It may be a good time to finally do that, so there may be a double benefit by looking at it through the bond market. What is the actual cost of the bond?
Up for us, though, up and above all this is usually a cost. Do we have any ideas?
Well, and so all of this is presented net of assumed issuance costs, which I did. Let me just take a look here, see if I.
And would we have that issuance cost if we did it through a bank?
Right, it's a good question. So yeah, usually then through a bank, what you avoid is the rating, so the bond rating, so you avoid that cost, which, you know, on a $10 million type sized issue might be, you know, about $30,000. And then, you know, certainly from, you know, your bond counsel typically would do your bond resolution, so you would get that in either case. They also typically do your official statement, so that cost would be avoided if you went to a bank as opposed to the public bond market.
But again, all of the savings you're currently seeing have included that in there. So
correct.
The net present value.
That's right. And so just, again, I think we were being fairly conservative. I think I put about $175,000 of cost of issuance and all of the series that you just saw here. Well, let me maybe back up to, so yeah, all of these that you see here check marked, we assigned a blanket $175,000, which was deployed over all of those, and I think that's a conservative number for a bond issue. Again, it would be less if it were a bank loan.
Now, as for savings now versus long-term debt, what the commission had to look at in the past was trying to put together a plan that would make the sewer system financially feasible, therefore bringing down the overall cost on a yearly basis in order to make that plan obtainable. I don't know if we're even considering stuff like that right now, whether that actually is mattering to us, because we haven't had that discussion in quite a while.
And Randy, I think we've shown in the past and still currently now that really in order to do that, there is no good way to do that. I mean, by extending the debt, you're taking on more interest costs by moving it out. You could go with scenario 2 that front loads it for a couple of years to lower it, but then you're right back where you were. It just doesn't pencil out, unfortunately.
I don't disagree. I was just making the point that was the conversations that we had. For example, the difference between paying $1.1 million per year, or the idea of paying $800,000 at one point per year, being more attainable for putting together a plan that shows that it will break even at some point, because we were always buying time. We always knew that sewer up there needed years and years in order to get money coming in. Currently, we are finally looking at the apartments, 2 apartment complexes of 350 unit total, and then of course the housing development up on top of the hill. But even those things, when you think about it, are still several years out.
Sure.
So I'm not saying that we do that. I'm just telling the other commissioners that's why we had looked at doing the lower amount over the longer period in the past. And I appreciate that was in here for us to still consider.
Yes, it is still in there. Under scenario 2.
Scott, this is Kevin again. Could you click back over to Rustlewood?
Yes.
Scenario 1. Okay. And so this is for Rustlewood, you would be more inclined to recommend a public sale versus a bank sale?
Well, because of the term, I'd say yes. However, it is something that I would want to check whether a bank either goes out that far. I think we had some earlier discussions as to whether you at all would want to shorten the Rustlewood debt. But before I guess officially saying just because of Rustlewood we should go a public sale, I would still like to reach out to a bank or two and just get either indications of rates or of interest in the debt that we've talked about and its shape, and then find out if we include Rustlewood, does that change things in their minds or not?
Okay, and then just a quick question for probably Frank. That current debt service, is that what we're putting into Rustlewood? What are we putting into Rustlewood from either REAP or 09?
I don't know if we're, the last year, 200,000. I don't know if we budgeted for that this year. So give me a couple of minutes and I can check on our computer and then I can get an answer back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking item specific for the last several years. Something comes up and we've been covering it there. One of the problems that we have with the Rustlewood and the idea of, there's something we're not even talking about is also setting things up for a balloon payment. But that wouldn't really do so well in Rustlewood because there is no opportunity for expansion.
That's correct.
So you look at what you have now, it's not going to be much better in 10 years or 15 years if we set it up as a balloon through a bank than it is now. It can't be. It just doesn't look possible.
And I agree with Randy on that. There is no way to do that for Westwood. There's just no expansion efforts at all there.
So in that regard, are you saying are you supportive of this, Randy, or is that a cause for concern on this?
On this particular one, I'm supportive of it, just to get down the rates. Anything we can save now is what we're gonna save in the long run. My true belief is on Rustlewood, we're gonna have a whole new debt probably in the next several years on that system.
Yeah.
That's my real worry. So what we need to do is get this as low as we can and accept that we're gonna have to swallow it for all these years to come.
Right.
And there's gonna be something else coming.
Okay, so I was just trying to be clear that the fact that there's no expansion capability there is actually a reason to support refinancing that debt.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay,
That's correct. And that was refinance it without even considering, because one of the things, like I said, we hadn't talked about, if we were doing a refinancing on some of the other debts, would be the idea of, if going through a bank, of a balloon payment, and you're paying, the interest in the early years to make it cost shareable amongst, equitable amongst the people that live there, and those that come on end up sharing that burden later on. Compared to Rustlewood, where you don't have that opportunity at all, because there is nothing else coming. What do we have? 12, but the truth is we're already over with our water, so don't know.
yeah, great point.
So Scott, what I'm hearing is that we would like maybe to come back as soon as we can with another meeting to discuss moving forward with a refinancing of everything except the 2011 bonds at this point. That you're recommending. And then you can check on some bank financing.
Yep.
With regards to Rustlewood.
Yes.
And give us some answers there.
Yes.
Am I missing anything?
Yeah, and I think if I've got it right, then I think we were talking basically no extensions, no shape changes, really just sort of the scenario ones I think that we saw earlier.
Yeah,
Well, maybe one more thing, if we can consider, just because we still are going to have to ask questions of ourselves on what is feasible now when it comes to rates and stuff like that for the Belfair wastewater, is the idea of a bank loan with a balloon paying, principal or paying some other aspects of it to get that rate down, because as these buildings come up, they're going to be able to share in the costs, and it won't have to come out of REIT if we set it up that way. I'm okay with what we're doing. We're doing great with it, but it would be nice to be able to keep some of that REIT money for other projects around the county.
I would agree with that. I'd be interested in just kind of taking a look at it, but I mean, in my opinion, as a worst case scenario, or even maybe a default position right now for me, I'm good with scenario one. I think there are healthy savings there in Belfair that we can get doing that, and then revisiting the 2011 bond next year as things kind of shake out. But I think having an opportunity to capture that savings this year, or getting that kind of figured out this year to capture those savings, I think is really the right move for the county.
Okay.
And this is Lisa. Right now with the REIT money, you have a strong REIT revenue coming in now. I don't know what that's going to look like in 2 or 3 years. So I would be more inclined to look at continuing that spending now than looking at it later. So if you were to front load this, so you didn't have to have that REIT, or as much REIT right now, what happens then when you get into the 3rd year, and what does the market look like, and what is your REIT revenue then?
This is Randy, and that's kind of my point that I was trying to make, and why to look at maybe. I'm not saying to do them, but I'd just like to see what that option looks like, because I think we are going to eventually here have a conversation on REIT and the future of REIT. And we're, I'm supportive of keeping those rates down, but at the same time, are there different ways to keep the rates down and not have to take so much of that rate money that might be able to be used for other projects? Or it doesn't show up. That is the greatest fear, as Madam Treasurer just made note of.
So just, Randy, so you're talking, so he's presented scenario 2 for both Rustlewood and Belfair in a current refinancing that would front load your savings. But as you can see, there is a cost to that in 2020 if we were to do it now, just a small one. But your savings goes down considerably from what just refinancing it looks like.
Yeah, I'm not as much worried about the real short-term benefit, because it's in a couple of years that we don't know what's going to happen with that REIT money. And if we're still paying, even get it down to, let's say, 800,000 a year, that's a lot. If something happens in the real estate market.
I was so concerned about coming up with another large payment like we had and struggled with that.
Boy, do I ever remember. Remember, we didn't even know it was there.
I don't need that stress.
It'd be nice to see what that looks like, maybe on a 10 or 15 year marker.
I don't know. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm talking just Belfair, by the way, just Belfair. But I'm comfortable doing what we're doing. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
Information is good. I just, it may be a question that we may want to discuss with each other if we were able to put together, for example, not having a $400,000 payment, 400,000 of the 1.1 or 1.2 that we're doing for the next, 10 years. And then as those buildings are built, you have all that capacity, all those new people, then you go out for a rebonding on the balloon. And then they share in that cost.
Scott, what would a call be on this then if we refinanced it? 10 years or 5 years?
Yeah, so typically, if the bond market would be 10 years.
Yeah,
if you want
that's
to go
what I
shorter,
thought.
You're going to pay a bit of a penalty.
Yeah.
In the bank market, you actually see quite a variance of what folks would offer. Generally, again, it's going to come with a bit of a penalty, but I mean, we have seen banks offer prepayable at any time. We also have seen, for instance, a local bank in the area provide a couple of options. Again, the lowest rate being a 10-year type call, meaning not prepayable for 10 years.
Right.
And then increasing the rate if you wanted to select something that was more flexible.
So you would be looking at least 10 years.
Generally, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of the time frame
Sure.
I think you should have in your mind.
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
Yeah, if you wanted to do something, don't think, at least sitting here today, that you should then come back and refi it in 3 years, for instance.
Right. Okay. So, Scott, how hard would it be just to look at, I mean, we're talking about one refinance for all of this debt, rolling it into one, even though we'd be tracking it separately, obviously. Does it make sense to look at Belfair in that sense by backloading it? I mean, and lowering it out 10 years? I mean, does that... It doesn't to me personally, but I'm just asking as a, following up on Commissioner Netherland's question.
So are you meaning more of a scenario like this, or is it even a different scenario where you're talking about lowering it as, almost interest-only payments with a large bullet, I guess, out 10 years or farther? Is that the question?
That's Randy's.
Yes. That's my question, see what it looks like, to see what those numbers look like for the next 10 years. I'm expecting, I don't usually like to bet on the future on some of these things because anything can happen. But these ones we currently have are actually in the works now. There are two apartment complexes that could literally bring 300 plus hookups, which is a huge difference for carrying the load. And it might be good to look at refinancing at that time and then keeping these payments down so there'd be REIT money available. But other than that, even if we do what we're doing right now, we're just paying extra out of REIT to keep that number small for the future. So it's good either way.
Well, and
I
I
think that the commission might want to talk about that later.
piggy bank on that follow-up is that you do have other debt that may be coming to Belfair that you're going to need those hookups for, and I'm not sure that you want to count on them for this particular one, but moving forward on any other debt that we might have to take on.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I can't argue that.
All right, so of course we don't have Patty McGuire here with us today, but Sharon is on the phone with me. I wouldn't necessarily make any formal decisions today. I would recommend that we schedule another meeting for August and have Scott come back to us with some questions on whether we could get bank financing out to include the Rustlewood. And two, I mean, my preference would be move forward with just, an equal savings across right now on those that we can, excluding the LTGO 2011s. And talk about this some more at our next meeting. Is that feasible? Sharon?
I would be good with that.
Okay. Scott, does that give you enough to work on, and then we'll schedule a meeting for August?
Yeah, I think it does. I may have to come back to you a little bit just as I think more if we're going to show a scenario with bullet payment.
Okay.
I guess the other certainly option is, as you mentioned, doing these as equal savings, and we
Right.
still have the 2011 that does sit out, that will remain outstanding.
Right.
That when the time comes, you can certainly look to reshape that particular issue, if that makes sense.
Right. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Is there
Did we get a copy of this presentation in our email?
you did get a copy. It's both, it's with the financial reports at the end of your financial
Okay.
reports that I sent you. Starts on page, 31, I think.
Okay, perfect.
But
Thank
if
you.
not, I can send it to you again. Let me know if you can't find it.
Yeah, I think it was in our briefing packet.
It should have been, yeah.
Should be fine.
It's there. It's not in color, but it's there.
It's not in color, you're right.
Maybe if we refinance, we can start putting things in our packet in color.
There we go. All right, so let's go there, and I will get with Diane and Scott to find a date as early in August as possible. I think I'm gone the first week, but we'll schedule maybe something that second week if that works for you, Scott.
Yeah, I think so. I think August would be great.
Okay. Unless you think you could have something by the end of the month, so that's up to you. I just
Yeah, I mean, potentially we could. I just need to reach out to, I think, again, a couple of banks. It'll just be discussion. So if the end of the month works better for you all, then I think we can make that work.
let me talk to Diane and see what that looks like, because their calendar gets pretty full pretty fast.
Okay.
But let me see what that might look like, and then I'll get back to you with some tentative dates.
Sounds great.
Okay?
Awesome.
All right. Scott, thank you very much. Again, everybody, the financial reports were in your packet. If you have any questions about those, I'm not going to go over them today. Just give me a call if you have any questions, and I can answer those for you. Otherwise, I think we are good to go. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Everyone.
We're adjourned.
Have a great day.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.